as we all know, there are a variety of languages out there, but most of us are limited to learning only one or a few of them. Some of us, however, are lucky enough to learn many of these languages. Some of the most common languages include French, English, and Spanish, and some of the least common languages include Zulu, Hungarian, or Nepali. The Ethnologue, one of the more prestigious sources to acquire linguistics information from, lists that there are 6,909 living languages around the world right now. By living languages, they mean languages that are currently being in use. Of course, this number may vary because languages become extinct and new languages are made almost every day. If we were to create a group of people who each spoke 3 languages that were different from everyone else in that same group, we would need 2,303 people to speak every language that's being currently spoken right now in the world. However, since all the 2,303 people in that group speak different languages, none of them will be able to fully understand one another. Or would they? Well, that is where the question of the difference between a dialect and a language comes in. It is often really difficult to tell the difference between a dialect and a language, as evidenced by these videos I found on YouTube.
One of the most difficult theoretical issues in linguistics is to distinguish between language and dialect or language and varieties. At first sight, there may be no problem at all. If 2 people speak differently, there seem to be only 2 possibilities. If they understand each other, they must speak varieties of the same language. If not, they can be said to speak different languages. But is it really that simple? Probably not.
I mean, English is a language, right? And this is English. But so is this. And back in time, this was English. Even further back, but we call this English too. Wait, I get it. This is Old English, and this one is Middle English, and this is Modern English. So are these 3 languages, or 3 different stages of the same language? Where's the line between a dialect and a language anyway? Is it just arbitrary or conventional?
So, although we don't seem to have a clear answer as to the difference between a dialect and a language, linguists have made some progress in this. One acceptable explanation is whether or not 2 languages are mutually intelligible. If 2 people, for example, can speak to one another and understand what the other is saying, then those 2 people are said to be speaking the same language. However, they might be speaking different dialects. If those 2 people cannot understand each other at all, then they are said to be speaking different languages completely. However, there is an exception to this. Languages such as Norwegian and Danish are mutually intelligible. However, they are considered 2 different languages. There's also the example of some dialects in China that are not mutually intelligible. However, they are still considered dialects. Now, if you want to criticize linguists for not coming up with a good definition or a good way to differentiate between a language and a dialect, just look at this map of Kenya taken from Ethnologue, consisting of the 58 language variations that are spoken there right now. So, just by looking at this map of Kenya alone, if you take into account the entire world and try to decide which is a dialect and which is a language, you would have a pretty difficult task ahead of you, especially if you're doing what this map is doing, which is detailing the borders for the 58 different language variations that are spoken in this one country alone. So why does this map of Kenya come to be so divided and have so many different languages or variety of languages? Well, varieties of languages, or so-called dialects, can arise due to many different reasons. One of these reasons being ethnical differences in a region. If one ethnical group has historically been divided from the other ethnical group for whatever ethnical reason, they can ultimately find ways to communicate that differ from the other group, and they then ultimately develop 2 dialects from what used to be one language or one dialect. Ethnical differences, however, are not the only way that this map can come to look like this. Another difference can come from its geographical landscape that can impede one group of people from coming into contact with another within the same country or state. For example, a group of people living on one side of the Everest may never have been able to come in contact with another group of people living on the other side. Although they are within relatively close range with one another, they will develop very different ways to communicate over time and create different dialects. Now, with all this information, we can more fully understand how one of the most famous linguists, Uriel Freinreich, held his opinion on the matter of the difference between a language and a dialect. He once said that a language is a dialect with an army and a navy. By this definition, he places more importance on languages being derived from national boundaries and political or social factors, instead of the prior definition relying on mutual intelligibility of two languages or dialects. Another important topic to discuss is the debate or the belief that dialects are inferior to language. It is true for almost everyone that if your friend were to tell you that he's able to speak a dialect, you'd think he's capable of speaking something really weird. Now, if that same friend were to tell you that he can speak a different language, then that wouldn't seem so weird to you. It would seem almost normal. We have fundamentally changed the meaning of a dialect to signify something that's inferior to a language, that does not meet all the criteria or all the requirements that a complete language does, and is therefore an incomplete form of a language. However, this is obviously not true. Maybe the stigmatization of the word dialect came from our discrimination of all languages other than English, and our feeling that English is the proper language. However, this argument does not hold. It's not true either, because English itself has many dialects, including the Australian dialect of English or the Scottish dialect of English, which all differ from each other very much. I might start confusing you with this talk of Scottish dialect of English and Australian dialect of English, because you might just say these are all different accents of English. However, that's not the case. A dialect and an accent are two different things, and they should be distinguished. An accent can become a dialect not only if the pronunciation is different, but also if the grammatical rules and the vocabulary are changed as well. So, take for instance someone who speaks with a southern accent here in the United States, and compare that person to someone who speaks with a Boston accent here in the United States. You can clearly tell the difference, especially between how they pronounce things. But if you tell these same two people to write a paragraph in English, then they should have a grasp of the standard English grammar and vocabulary so that their paragraph matches up really closely. An example of an accent becoming a dialect, however, is if the person with a southern accent in the United States began writing in a way that deviated from the normal English grammar rules and instead matched up more closely with the way they think, and more people would follow along and write that same way, then that accent would now just have become a dialect. However, this difference between a dialect and an accent is also obscure, just like the difference between a dialect and a language. Because if someone's just not educated enough, and they don't know how to write, or they don't know how to write correctly with the proper English grammar rules, then you cannot tell the difference between an accent and a dialect, because that is what differentiates them. So from all the information that you know so far, you should know that if you speak a language, then you speak a dialect of that language. A dialect does not mean it is a broken language, or a language that has no structure or no logic. If that were the case, then speakers of a dialect would not even be able to understand themselves. All languages in the world change. Some languages become dialects because the language itself evolves, but some people decide to keep the old way of speaking and writing in that language, so it becomes a dialect of the new language that formed. By using this example, we can see that a dialect is so closely related to a language that it can even be derived from it, and should therefore not be considered inferior.